friends, normally I would say to you, it's time for Ask Dr. Doreen, but as I cheated and told you, Dr. Granpeesheh can't be here today, but in her place, we have the wonderful, the fabulous Evelyn Kung, and you're the clinical director for the Center for Autism and Related Disorders. She has been working in this field for more than 2 decades, approaching 3 decades, a wealth of experience. I always talk about what a great expert Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh is, but if we were going to have anybody to take her place, I would want to have you. So thank you so much. And we love you always bring a fresh perspective, that you are also one of the most empathetic people that I have ever met, which is a wonderful thing. So we do like to remind everyone at the start of the show that there is no expert that in this format could give individual specific advice. But having said that, we're going to throw some questions at her and right here, and we're going to hear some suggestions about things that you might want to consider. It helps you to have a better, richer decision tree when you hear some of the things that our experts have to share. So thank you, first of all, for being here.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
I assure you it is our pleasure and a thrill. I know everybody likes to watch reruns, but it's nothing like when it's live. So I'm going to jump right in here. We had a bunch of questions that came in the last 48 hours, but remember, you guys can be writing in on the live feature, and we'll be checking in on that as well. Okay. Hello. I suspect my daughter, 13 months old, is on the spectrum. We are in a parent-led intervention program and will be enrolling in CARD at the end of the year. My question is in regard to regression. New data exists that suggests regression is more common than previously thought. That said, how common is regression observed in children who are in the middle of their treatment? Does therapy help offset whatever that means? She or he says regression. Also, is there an update on little Jack Riley? Thank you. You've been a huge source of hope for me and my family, and we won't say the name of the person who wrote the question because we like to preserve your anonymity. But I will be honest with you that I need to check back in with the family for Jack Riley. I have not heard from them since Christmas time, but he was doing great at Christmas time. But you know what? I will check back in, and I don't know if you have any update on Jack Riley and his family.
I don't believe I've talked to them recently, but I know that they had moved away.
Yes.
And at the last time I saw was probably the beginning of the year, and it sounded like things were going really well.
Absolutely.
So that's exciting.
But so for this family, first of all, can I talk about the fact that the family, 13-month-old child in the family is already on top of that, and how wonderful that is, and how if we could get every family to be that on top of it, I know that we would see better outcomes.
Definitely. I mean, congratulations to the family for being willing to acknowledge and to do something and to actually be active in terms of their intervention for their 13-month-old. Because 13-month-olds aren't doing a lot. They're still taking a lot of naps and they're still sleeping a lot. But the whole idea is that the whole time that they're awake, the important thing is that they're learning something.
Yes.
A typical child is learning every waking moment of the day. And, we do intensive intervention kind of to replicate that. If you look at the old Lovaas study, that's why they chose the 40 hours, was if a typical child is awake and learning constantly, we wanted the same for these kids too. Mm-hmm. So definitely in terms of the 13, in terms of regression, I don't know if there's a rate. I haven't checked into, if people think that, it's more active now and it happens earlier or ongoing. But for the most part, one of the things just in terms of intervention is that at first baseline assessment is really important. So if you're using skills, and we use skills here, is we go in and the families do this assessment on where their child is at. And as we go through and we start doing some treatment planning for the kids, when you have a supervisor who's looking at your program, we're monitoring every level of skill. And so most of the time, whatever area is a deficit, that's what we're trying to target. For a child that's 13 months, a lot of times one of the things that we're looking at is just stimulus orientation. So if the door slams, they should look at it. If there's a light, that flashes, they should be able to attend and use their eye contact to be able to see what's going on. Okay. And that's a lot of what a 13-month-old is doing. I've worked with really, really young kids, and usually they're siblings, and that's why we get them young. But a lot of the time, it's just getting them to orient to their environment, orient to the people in their environment, being able to give that eye contact attention. So a lot of it is the initial attention so that they're able to look at what's there. And a lot of the kids on the spectrum later on, one of the issues that we have is that they're not attending to the right stimuli. They're not looking at the right things. And so we actually have to sit there and talk about like observation skills.
Yeah.
How do you look at your environment, and then how do you decide what's important?
I always talk about the Swiss cheese, that sometimes our older kids are Swiss cheese, that they have some skills, but then they have these holes and gaps that need to be filled in. And when I think about a 13-month-old, if we could fill in the gap before the rest of the cheese is formed, then that child doesn't have to catch up on that later on.
Yes.
And when I think about, like, I wouldn't normally think about stimulus orientation and the importance of a child, if the door slams, turning to look at it. But when I think about it now, about all the things you learn by noticing something and all the other things that you're picking up at the same time, like you're noticing whether somebody is afraid of the door slamming.
Yes.
And you're noticing, you know, that you're hearing the things and hearing the words and hearing the sounds, and your brain is different. So if you miss that point of orienting to something, you're missing a lot.
You're missing a lot of information.
Okay.
Okay, because a 13-month-old is gaining receptive language skills. There's a few words here and there expressively. You might have a few early, vocal kids. But for the most part, they're really looking at their environment. They're observing, and then, the beginning of a 13-month-old is learning to imitate. So really the basic skills of when they see somebody and they hear, can they orient to the voice and then see what that person's doing and saying. Yeah. And if they're not looking, then they're going to miss all the nonverbal cues. Right. They're going to miss all the ability to imitate, even if they know how to imitate.
Okay.
So a lot of
times,
that
makes crazy sense to me.
Yeah.
About getting that skill in place.
Yeah. So a lot of times, like when we get them at this young of an age, that's what we're teaching all the parents how to do. Kind of like what this person was saying about a parent-led intervention.
Yes.
A lot of times we'll go in and actually go train the parents, or if they're our grandparents who are watching the child, or nannies or whatever, we're training all of them to every moment that child's awake, we want them looking and attending and seeing who's there and what's there and what, and getting them to just be able to notice all the things they're supposed to be noticing at that age.
I love it. Now, on the other part of this question, though, was about, does regression, if I'm reading it right, does regression happen in the middle of treatment? So if a child has regressed into autism, you start treatment, is it possible for there to be more regression once you've started treatment?
I think it's the way that you're monitoring it. There are definitely times during intervention where a child loses a skill, but whether the skill was intact there when you started or whether they only had a part of the skill and it wasn't a generalized skill, that's a big question, because one of the things when parents come in and they fill out this assessment about what their child can do. But even for the parents themselves, whoever's answering, their definition of what that skill is very different.
Yes.
And maybe, and especially at this age, things go quickly. So when you might learn part of it, and 6 months later, there's another part added to it. So it might look like they regressed, but they really didn't. They might have just stayed where they were at, and maybe they didn't build up on it. Yeah. But the thing is, if you have a good treatment program, and you have someone who's just looking at your child in all respects all the time, the minute you start to see a skill start to go away, you're not going to let it go away.
Yeah.
You reinforce it, you actually make them practice it more for fluency, and it's almost like you don't allow them to drop something.
Yeah.
Because you really, at this age, they're not doing a lot.
Yeah, right.
So the minute something starts to fade or could be fading, you don't allow it to fade.
Yeah.
You're, as a supervisor of the treatment planning team, you're really looking at this kid and saying, hey, we only have a really small amount of skills that we're focusing on because they're not awake that long.
Yeah.
And so you're really looking at everything, and hopefully what you're doing is you're building on everything that was already there. And let's say they start to lose something, you probably may not even notice it if they're already going so far ahead with other things that they're learning.
And I just want to say, I know that, as a parent of a child who regressed, we fear that forevermore. Even he is 13 now and doing so well, and there were times when, like, we would have mastered something, but then we would see a little bit of slip and his team would be right back on it. And but my level of fear and anxiety would go through the roof. I have to say that probably more than half of the phone calls that Card received from me was about, is he regressing again? Because you worry, you lost something once, you worry about losing it again. And I know for people who now are catching it early, that they've heard stories from people like me and like Nancy talking about our kids regressing. And I think part of it is managing the fear as a parent and leaning into your team and, making sure that you talk about it when you see a skill at all fading or not being maintained, but to sort of dissect that from the emotion of it. Honestly, I get it. Like, I can go right back there to the fear of, oh no, what if we lose again? But I've seen so many families go through that and work through it, and I haven't seen a kid regress like they did in the beginning.
No,
ever.
they're not allowed to.
And I like that.
They're not allowed to. I mean, we're so on top of them.
That
they may be building all these skills and maybe they lose one thing, but maybe that one thing is something that they rarely use. That's usually what it's related to. And a typical child is that way too.
Yes.
They learn skills and then the summer happens and then there's a whole group of kids that don't remember whatever
the slide.
it was. Yeah,
the slide. The summer slide. That's the name for it. Yeah.
It happens to some kids and it doesn't happen to others. And so it's important that, as the parent being involved, that you know what your child is learning. And that's the caregiver aspect, that parenting. And, okay, you learned this, now it's my turn to put it into place in real life. And a child at this age, even, below 5, you pretty much know everything that they know. And you'll be putting everything into place because you're going to make them use it. And that's the aspect of like ABA that people forget about sometimes, is they learn about it in the room and they generalize it, but they forget about the fluency aspect. You have to use it. If you don't lose it, if you don't use it, you lose it.
Exactly.
And that's across the board, typical, atypical, whatever, So it's important that you go in and you know what's going on and that you're making sure that child's being exposed to all these different situations and that they're able to use it. And it's tiring, but I think a young child, it's actually not that tiring. Because the more that they do, the more excited the parents are.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, last thing, because I know we all know it so well, but just in case there's somebody new, I want to make sure that they remember that key to everything is making sure that when the child is learning constantly, that it's fun.
No, exactly.
It's got to be reinforcing.
It's got to be reinforcing and it's got to be relevant.
Yes.
The things that the kids find relevant and fun, they won't forget it.
Yeah. And I didn't want to leave it unsaid, even though it almost goes without saying, but in case somebody's new, let's remember that that's the base of everything. That whatever you're doing, when you're doing the stimulus orientation, whatever it is, there's got to be an element of it that's fun for the child. It's got to be reinforcing for them. It has to be meaningful reinforcement for attending to those things. Otherwise, you're going to have an unhappy child.
Yeah, but it's also like people will, like a lot of parents at this age, especially the younger ages, they're like, we just want our child to play. Play is actually one of the hardest things to teach our kids because there's no purpose except for social. And if you have a social deficit, there's really this unknown quality to why you're having to do something. So then that's where, if you have a good reinforcer assessment, you're giving them other reasons to want to do this activity. And it might not be that activity that is so fun, that might be typically fun for another child, but it's okay. You're giving them a different reason, an additional reason to say, hey, if I never see M&Ms or I never see this other toy except when I'm doing this activity that I don't really know what it means, but I'm doing it, it's okay.
It is okay.
Because at the beginning, you're trying to teach them how to do the skill. And once they know how to do the skill and they practice it, they will find some fun in it.
They will. Absolutely. All right. I told you she was good. We're going to continue on with more questions, but first we're going to take a short break. Stick with us.
I'm very excited excited to be here at Denim and Diamonds. This is a fantastic night, supported by so many incredible people, and to see the kind of change and the kind of help that's being given.
It's kind of like going to the Oscars, and it's just been growing ever since, and we're overwhelmed at the support from the community.
I first want to thank everybody for coming out and really helping this Denims and Diamonds fundraiser, because autism has affected so many people, and the work that they've been doing is just off the charts and just wonderful.
As a mom, I'm grateful that I was managed to get the intervention for my daughter when she was young. So it's important to see that all kids can get the same type of intervention.
You with the side eyes, don't be discouraged, oh I realize it's hard to take courage in.
We're just thrilled to be able to raise funds for things that are so vital, like safety equipment, helmets, or fences so the kids don't run away, or iPads so they can learn to communicate.
There's still so much more to do, and we're here to lend our little hand and make this thing a global thing.
If you're just tuning in with us, this is the time that we normally do Ask Dr. Doreen. We're continuing on with Ask Dr. Doreen. We just don't have Dr. Doreen with us. But in her place, she handpicked who we could have in her place, somebody that she trusts implicitly. We're talking about the clinical director for the Center for Autism and Related Disorders, Evelyn Kung. And thank you so much for being with us today and answering our viewers' questions. If you want to, you can be writing in your questions on the live feature, but we're continuing on with questions that have come in the last 48 hours. Somebody wants to know about appropriate programming for autistic adults, particularly those labeled lower functioning. I'm putting the quotation marks because they did. It's practically non-existent. And then somebody wrote in, they said they wanted us to check out a unique program, Operation Meaningful Life, on Facebook. And there's an article about this amazing program in this month's Autism Parenting magazine. This program has all heads turning towards it. But I wanted to stop and talk just for a couple of seconds about the fact that while in the world at large, maybe it's practically non-existent, it isn't at CARD.
Oh, definitely not.
And so I'd like for you to talk for a couple of minutes about what there is at CARD for adults and the wide range of it. I would love, because specifically they wanted to know about lower functioning, but we have for everybody.
Yes.
All right.
So, part of this is because we've been around for over 20 years now. And I think my oldest child since I've been working here is probably 26, around there. And, I've had the whole spectrum that I've worked with. I have the kids who, recovered, went on, and know nothing about their diagnosis. And many of those kids are actually in graduate school, getting paid to go to school, and are amazing, brilliant people. And then there's the other end where I have a child who probably would fit, this term lower functioning, but in reality, that child is probably who I'm most proud of, because he's in his 20s now, and people would say he's challenged because he's able to ask for what he wants. And there's a few comments, but we have him using his iPad, using a couple of different apps to get everything, his needs met. And he is the happiest kid ever.
Yeah.
And I think for the parents, that's the thing that they've always wanted for him, is to be happy. And let me tell you, he is happier than any of my other kids out there. Because the ones that recover, they have to deal with life.
Yes.
And life is hard. They have to deal with all the problems that you and I deal with. And, they have all the challenges of a teen to a 20-something-year-old and figuring out their life. And, they're great individuals, but they have the ups and downs of life.
Sure.
But my kid, who's 23, 24 right now, is like, he is the happiest kid ever.
Yeah.
He has all his needs met. He can get anything he wants. If he's not feeling well, we taught him to point to whatever part of his body, and he just says ow.
Okay.
So like if he has a sore throat, he'll just point to his throat and say ow. If he stubs his toe, he points, but we know then we can help him.
Yeah.
And we have the parents are incredible, and they very supported community, and we have a little micro enterprise business that we've built for him, and really getting out there now. Especially in the last year or two that he's been out of the school system.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, since he was 14, we've been talking about, what he should be doing in his life, and really starting at the point at 14 saying, where is he happiest?
Yes.
What environment, what components. And we always knew that he likes to be outdoors. He likes the beach because he lives in California.
Right.
Doesn't like cold water, so the beach is not a good place in December.
Okay.
But and he likes being, doing different things now. And this is a kid that actually we had to teach to like,
okay.
And when he was younger, the minute if people came into the house, he'd always go to the other room.
Oh.
And he was the child that, like, in classrooms, there was a certain point where we would just throw a blanket over him. Mm-hmm. Instead of taking him out of the room, we would just throw a blanket over him because he just needed to calm down.
Right.
But now he likes being with people. So when people come into the house, he actually looks out the door, and he'll come and he'll sit himself right in the middle of everybody and look around like, what's going on, guys?
Yes.
But he is very, in his life, he's happy. He has things. He's productive.
Right.
Every day he has his routine of what he's going to do, and it changes every day. Because for him, we've really focused a lot on putting routines, but making them flexible.
The thing that I always notice about when we start to talk about teens and adults is always in ABA we're talking about the individual, and it's programming for the individual. But I think it just becomes so much more individual the older they get, because there are certain programs that if you have a 3-year-old who's on the spectrum, there are certain programs that are sort of run-of-the-mill that almost every single kid is going to need at some point. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you get to a 14-year-old, not everybody needs the same thing at all.
Yeah. And so actually that's one thing that's a perfect thing that's coming. Probably at the beginning of next year, we're doing skills for adults right now.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
We're writing, the curriculum's been written. It still needs to be filled in. So basically we wanted to get something out there because we've had so many requests for adults.
Yeah.
So skills for adults is coming out. And what I'm doing right now with the adult team who's working on developing skills is we're actually doing the assessment questions. And the assessment questions there are actually harder to write now because we want to put in the ones to try to figure out what level you're at.
Yeah.
So that if you have a child who's nonverbal, you're not having to answer about are they driving a car, are they having appropriate conversations in the community.
Right.
And the ones that are driving cars and graduating from high school and trying to maintain staying in college, they shouldn't be asked all the questions about is there a way to communicate.
Yes.
So we're trying to actually right now write the questions that will divide the person going in to the right way so that they're able to just answer the questions that are most probably relevant to where they're at right now.
And that still exists in skills, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't taken the assessment in a while, but when you first start skills, there's a set of questions that you ask that help to figure out what questions are going to be
and so
appropriate for you.
there's the first 10 questions to try to figure out where you're at so you don't have to. But this is even more complex now.
Sure.
Because of the range of skills.
Yeah.
Last week, actually today, I think we're starting a 40-something-year-old college professor, I think.
Wow.
And just wanting some, kind of not relationship advice, but trying to how to maintain boundaries.
Yes.
Recognize some of the emotional things that happen.
Gosh, I need that. Can I sign up for that too? Because I need that. Well, you know what? I always take a step back, and one of the things that I learned because I got to read through skills. When I was training to come and hold this seat, there was more that I needed to know than the average parent, right? To be able to sit here. And so I got to read through skills, and I was always struck by as I read the progression of things and read the lessons, I was like, oh man, we could all benefit from this.
No, it's
especially the executive functions curriculum, man. We all need.
Yeah, all of us need it.
And the social language curriculum. I got to be honest, there were things that I was like, oh, I've always wondered why that didn't work for me. Right?
Yeah. No, there's many times, even just here, you know, we have a big business now, and I'll be writing something for someone, and then some just random person from here will look at it and said, they'll point and they'll be like, we didn't know that. Is that how you're supposed to do that?
Right. Right. No, it makes great sense. So,
but no, so that is coming. It's a part of CARD already. We already have quite a few adults, you know, over time. We take them all the time. We haven't formally had an adults program because it's just been integrated as our kids have grown. A lot of times they've just grown into the adult phase of life, and they do have different needs and different types of, you know, not just needs, but, you know, what should their life be like? And then also in the context of their families.
Yeah.
And every family is different. And we try to respect where the family is at and what values they have.
Yeah.
And trying to, you know, figure out, like, you know, what are the goals for the family for this child, but also what are the goals for that child directly in that family.
Yes.
Because they're different.
Yes. And that's true of all families that you deal with in CARD. I know that even if it's a child that's 2.5, you take those things into consideration. I do think it gets so much more complicated the older that they are. But even for the 2-year-old, you take those things into consideration.
No, we definitely do. You have to, because it's their life. And even, let's say you're at CARD and you're not anymore, you stay in your family.
Yes, absolutely.
So you have to fit into your family.
But having said that, sometimes we have parents who will write in and say, you know, I have a 2.5-year-old or I have a 3-year-old, and they're wanting to work on things that I don't want them to work on. I want them to work on conversation skills and job skills, and they want to work on joint attention. And I don't know if you want to take just a second to talk about the fact that when people are making recommendations with the really small kids, how important it is for parents that, having not been through this before, that we need to listen to our professionals.
No, definitely. I mean, we always say that if you don't know what to teach your child, you go look at other kids who are their age. Whatever age you're at, go look and see at those individuals at the same age. And there's going to be a range of skills of what's required. But for the most part, wherever community you're at, go and look at what those kids are. Because what are those kids doing? And that helps the parents give a measure or, you know, a way to measure what they're teaching. 20 years ago, I used to travel everywhere, all across the country. And I mean, I've been in little towns of 85 people, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, I'll walk in and the 2-year-old is naming off, you know, what a trapezoid is.
Right.
And I think, okay, a trapezoid, it's a shape in one of those shape books, so that's why they were taught that.
Right.
But they really, in real life,
it's not useful information.
They will never need it, and a lot of adults don't know what a trapezoid is.
Right.
So it's just always trying to listen to whoever your supervisor who is that professional, because, you know, they should have a scope of what development is.
Yeah.
And if they don't have a scope, because sometimes ABA providers don't have a developmental background, they should know to look.
Absolutely.
You know, they should know to see, like, developmentally, what is appropriate for this age and where are we at. And you're planning for now. You're not planning for the future. As you get into, let's say, the teenagers that I work with, where we're starting to figure out schooling, we do have to make larger plans. But even then, they're very generalized plans to figure out, like, you know, how do we get specific later on with transition.
Yeah. And, you know, last week when we did the show with Dr. Graham Pichet, we got so many questions about skills. So many people wrote in and asked about skills. And I mentioned to them then that you recently did a training for us, especially for parents who are CARD parents, because each client, it isn't just children, each client that comes into CARD gets their own skills account that comes with being a CARD family. It isn't just CARD families that can have a skills account, but you get one if you are a CARD client. And for the parents of those kids, you did a training for them to know how they could utilize the information in skills. So that was, if you haven't seen that training, it is Evelyn who does that training for us, which was great. And lives on our YouTube page, and you guys can go and find it there, and anyone can watch it. You don't have to have a code. If you're not a card parent and you want to go watch it, but some of it won't apply to you if you're not a card parent. Because you'll have differences if you're not a card parent. In any case, we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to come back with more questions during Ask Dr. Doreen, this special day with Evelyn Kung. Stick with us.
Hi guys, welcome back to Smarty. For this month, I figured we're going to do a super special portrait that is in the theme of October, which means spooky eyes that follow you as you walk around. In this activity, you and your child are going to work on emotions and socio-dramatic play. So let's get started. The materials you'll be needing are a camera, a ping pong ball, X-Acto blade, tape, and a marker. And if your kids are up to it, props and costumes. Now let's take some photos. It's a great time to work on emotions and socio-dramatic play. Let's get our props.
See all the colors in the sky tonight. It's time to let the sunshine hide.
Once you've finished your photo shoot with your child, select one of the photos and print it out on a large piece of paper. Now that you've selected your photo, you're going to take an X-Acto blade and just cut out the eyes from it. This part of the activity is definitely only for the adults. Now that you've finished cutting out the eyes, what we're going to do next is take a ping pong ball and cut it in half. You'll see why in just a moment. So with the ping pong balls, we're going to create the illusion of the following eyes. So what you're going to do is take a marker and you're going to make a dot in the very, very center. You're going to want to make it like the same size of what the iris was in the photo. Now that the ping pong balls are done, I'm just going to tape them to the back of the photograph. So does it look like she's following you? Well, I hope you enjoyed this activity for Smarty. Until next time, craft on, guys.
Can you see me flying by your side?
Welcome back to Autism Live and to Ask Dr. Doreen. We have with us today not Dr. Doreen Grant-Pichet because she was called away, but in her place we have Evelyn Kung. She's the clinical director for the Center for Autism and Related Disorders. So if there was anybody who could fill Dr. Doreen's tiny little shoes, it would be Evelyn Kung. Thrilled to have her here, and she's answering your questions. So our next question, Dear Shannon, watched How to Dance in Ohio. There was a big screening at UCLA the other day for How to Dance in Ohio. I have it on my DVR, and I've watched part of it, but I haven't seen the whole thing because it played on PBS in April. But they go on to say, an apparent voice to concern when there is a change or change in expectation, the child gets stuck and doesn't actively seek help or figure out that there is another solution. This was an amazing teen who goes to college and last minute change in classroom, and she stood in the front of the room for the whole period. My teen does this too in various situations. Is this skill taught in skills? What is the skill called? And thank you. P.S. I listen to the show when I can, and Dr. Doreen is pure genius. So nothing to live up to there, right? Thank you so much for all your sharing and wisdom. So, what is there a name for that skill?
Well, it's multiple skills.
Okay. See, that's where it gets complicated.
Yeah, that's where it's complicated. This is very common. I've had kids in New York City on a snowstorm where PE got changed.
Yes.
And because it started snowing unexpectedly, he stood outside for the whole PE period where it snowed on him.
Breaks your heart.
And it's just very, very, it's upsetting to the child, and it's just it's sad from our end.
Yes.
You know, because you just want to do something. And it's upsetting because the school actually got mad at him for not going somewhere else. So that situation, I just always remember it because it was trying to manage all the pieces.
Well, and when you think about it, I mean, what it brings up for me is that we just commemorated the first anniversary of Paul Lee's death. And in all reality, it was a lot of the same issues that Paul rode the bus every morning, and the bus driver would say, okay, Paul, it's time to get off the bus. And because he had a substitute bus driver and that was not said, Paul didn't get off the bus. And the new bus driver didn't do what he was legally responsible for doing, which is walking the bus to see if everyone is off the bus. He parked the bus in the hot sun and left, and Paul sat on the bus and died.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, when you think about it, it's so frightening. And of course, a lot of people were like, well, why didn't he just get off the bus? Well, you know, that's a complete lack of understanding. And the school being mad that this young man didn't just go inside, it's a complete lack of understanding of what's happening. So help us, educate us.
I mean, this is where, I mean, we can't plan for every opportunity.
Right.
But this is the important thing of where whenever we're teaching these kids, I said, yeah, you're going to teach them a rule, but you have to teach them the exceptions to the rules along the way. Okay. So you have to be able to say, okay, this is a rule, but then try to think of other situations that would happen to show them, you know, this is a rule, but when this happens, then there's an alternative. Okay. But this child that they're talking about, this teen who is, you know, in college and is getting stuck, it becomes a problem solving.
Okay.
That's really what it is. It's executive function, all of it. All the parts of it is executive function. So one of the things is there's just a simple lesson called disengagement.
Okay.
It's like you're doing something and you have to be able to move your attention to something else. You have to be able to shift your attention.
Okay.
And so in skills, it's very simple because it's basically the beginning parts of I'm playing with Legos and mom wants me to go eat, so I have to like stop myself and disengage from the Legos so that I can go do something else. So that is a very minor component, but there is a sense of disengagement that the child has to recognize that they have to move their attention to. Okay. And then for the majority of the teens that I've worked with that do get this stuck, they're like, well, we're here, but nobody told us what to do. And there's that asking for help. Recognizing that there's a problem.
Right.
Okay, so asking what's different about this environment than normally happens.
Right.
And if there's nobody in the classroom, that means it's not a normal day.
Right.
And that means I need to go do something.
Okay.
And that something usually is to go ask for help. To go ask those good questions.
Yes.
And so that actually, the questions part is something that I think that we don't do enough for so many of our kids in ABA programs. They learn to ask simple questions like what, who, where for their daily life, but they don't know how to ask good questions a lot of times. So, you know, there are, you know, definitely there's a whole group that get, you know, all the training for that. But it's when something goes wrong, learning to just give all the information that's needed. So being able to recognize, okay, this isn't the same as what normally happens. There's nobody here. So that means something else is happening. So I need to go find someone to ask. Who would that good person be? And so they would need to know their environment to who they would ask. Who's the important people to ask? Like somebody in their class if they see somebody, or maybe, you know, somebody else that's in there's usually a sign somewhere. Just knowing that there, you know, there's information to look around and do that observation skill we talked about.
Yes.
To like look on the board or look on, you know, did they go to another room? And that's usually what happens in colleges is they'll write another room, or they'll put signs everywhere saying if you're in this class, you need to go to this place. And being able to look around and being able to make those judgments. Okay, people aren't here like they normally are. That means they're somewhere else. How would they know? I need to ask somebody if I see somebody. But if I don't see anybody, I need to look around and see if there's any information for me.
Yes.
And then being able to see and follow. So it's a problem solving overall. And it's a social problem solving.
Okay. Because there's two different types of problem solving in skills. So it's the social problem solving.
It's a social problem solving because you're in a place that has to deal with people.
Okay.
And you're trying to get someplace, there's information somewhere that you're not receiving.
Okay.
And so if it's really sitting there and teaching the child to recognize, where am I? What's going on? What's different?
Yes.
What's important? So that's the saliency aspect of it.
Okay.
So there's a lesson called determining saliency.
Yes.
Like what is actually important here?
Yeah.
The important thing is I get to class.
Yeah.
And I need to be wherever my teacher is.
Right.
So being in class is not being in a classroom. It's being wherever your teacher and your class students are.
Okay.
It's that flexibility.
Yes.
So then that's another part of EF is the flexibility of, you know, what's the important part of what I'm doing, and then what components make up those important parts.
And so maybe, because I think this is a parent who's asking specifically about which lesson is in skills, because I think they have skills. So maybe starting with taking the assessment for the EF section, and then going through and not looking at this as just a spot check of teaching one lesson, but going through the EF curriculum and working through it step by step, because EF kind of builds on all those different things, and you don't want to have part of it missing.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing about EF is it does build step by step, but there are some things where you just learn it isolated and it's okay.
Okay.
But whenever it comes to social, when it has to deal with somebody else, it's usually there's a foundation that of skills that you have to build on.
Okay.
And whenever you become social, there's more than one skill involved.
Okay.
Almost always.
Okay.
Because not everybody's the same.
And I got to refer to, because we've brought up skills so many times, and the skills people gave me my little cheat sheet here so that I would never forget to mention. So if you have questions about skills and you want to look at it, www.skillsforautism.com, but there's a phone number, 877-975-4559, and you can call them and talk more about skills. We talked a lot about it last week, so I'm not going to belabor too much for that. I think we should take a short break. I want to mention before we go to break that somebody wrote in with an IEP question from an LAUSD school that you want to know if something was missing from the document which was agreed upon in the IEP meeting. Does another IEP meeting need to be called on to put in the missing piece? Do we sign first and disagree, or what do we do? I'm going to let Bonnie deal with that, but I will tell you, if you haven't yet signed it, don't yet. Wait until we talk with Bonnie about it, but don't sign it if it's got something missing on it, even if you agreed to what was on the document in the IEP. Don't sign yet, okay? And then we're going to continue on, but we'll talk with Bonnie Yates about that tomorrow. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, we now have a new segment on Thursdays where special education attorney Bonnie Yates joins us, and you can write in your legal questions, and it's been an amazing new addition here at Autism Live, and that'll be tomorrow. It's in the first hour at the 45-minute marker. So we're going to take a short break, and we're going to be back with more questions with Evelyn Kung. Stick with us.
This is Logan Shepherd. At first glance, he looks like a typical American teenager. He plays in a band, loves hanging out with his friends. He doesn't like doing homework, and he's not really fond of broccoli. But Logan Shepherd is not your typical 14-year-old. Logan was diagnosed with autism at the age of 2. He was nonverbal, made no eye contact, and his parents were told to abandon all hope. Instead, his parents began an intensive intervention treatment. At its center was a quality ABA program known as the CARD method. This is Logan Shepherd now.
All I really want to say is, like, I'm kind of copying Martin Luther King. I kind of have a dream, like, that one day, like, I can just, like, inspire people and never give up. Because, like, that's what I want to do in life. Because if I can succeed, they can succeed. And I will succeed.
To follow Logan's musical journey, visit www.facebook.com/officialdrummerrock or @drummerrock on Instagram. For more information on the CARD method, visit www.centerforautism.com or call 800-345-CARD. Rock on, Logan.
Welcome back. We are here during a segment that we call Ask Dr. Doreen. Unfortunately, we don't have Dr. Doreen here with us today, but in her place, we have the fabulous Evelyn Kung, and she is the clinical director for the Center for Autism and Related Disorders, and we're thrilled and fortunate that we have her here with us answering your questions. So I want to move on to the next question. Hi, Shannon, having a moment here, and I'm sending you a hug, you know. Teen tends to assume. We had a volunteer meeting today. This is despite me asking a few times of the location and time and to ask him to confirm. He has mistaken times, locations, etc. before. He is resistant to my help. Just found out from him that this meeting was rescheduled. He wants to be independent and as do we, but that is not working. He has to deal with the consequences many times, having to wait for a long time for me to pick him up because I scheduled something else. What is the deficit? Executive planning? Short of me calling the organizer, how can we train him? Another example is an event which was a long morning drive. Asked him what he needed to bring, at least 3 different days. He said the message only said the time and map. We were not prepared at all. I read the message myself and it had all of the info. Reading problem? Sorry, I need to stop whining and get on with skills. Will it help me with these issues? And thank you so much for listening. You know I'm sending you hugs because I live a lot in this land. Right now we have these teenagers and they are like, I always tell the story about last year when Jen was in junior high and it was the end of the first semester and they had to pick up their new schedule and it was the first day. And so I go off to school to pick up the new schedule and go through it with him. And we get out into the quad and he looks at me and he goes, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm getting in line to pick up your schedule." And he said to me, "Look around. Do you see any other parents here? What are you doing? Why are you here? Why aren't you letting me do this?" And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. And I immediately stepped behind a pillar in shame as a parent for how could I have done this to him and how great is it that he noticed. And he comes running over in my face and he goes, "What am I supposed to do?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, what am I doing? Why am I here? What am I supposed to do? And I said, "Oh, okay, you're supposed to stand in the line that find your name and stand in the line." "What name?" I said, "What do you mean, what name? My first name or my last name?" And I said, "Oh, your last name. Go stand in the line that has the same letters as your last name. And do what when I get to the front of the line? Pick up your schedule. And then what am I supposed to do?" As he's yelling at me in this quad behind a pillar. And I'm trying not to laugh now because the whole thing is so off the wheels hilarious that he so desperately wants to be a teen. I so desperately want to drive the bus. And in between it all, it's a cluster, you know what. So I feel you. And so what do we call this, Evelyn?
Okay, so this is all executive function. No, the whole thing is, regardless of the diagnosis or not, they're still teenagers.
Oh, can I say too that while I stood there behind the pillar and my son is in gen ed and like 30 other students came up and they were like, "What are we doing? What line am I?"
Exactly.
And they were all, typical 12 and 13-year-olds. And then I felt a little bit better. But
no. So despite any diagnosis, they're still teenagers.
Yeah.
They still go through all the phases of adolescence that, a typical teenager would. It just gets a little bit more crazy because it's the deficits that start hitting and they don't know how to get the information.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you weren't there, those teenagers that didn't know where to go would just be asking their friends.
Yes.
Like,
or
what are we
another
doing
teacher.
Here? Or a teacher. But they would just be like, "What are we doing? Where are we?" I've stood in so many lines with my teenagers where they're all doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Where they're just looking at each other. Does anyone know why we're here? Does
Right.
anyone know?
Right, I had to do that in line recently and say, "What is this line for? Why
Yes.
are we here?
Yes.
Does anybody know why the line isn't moving?"
Yeah. So on that end, there's just a basic teen element. Okay. But the rest of it is going to be executive functioning, and it's going to be specifically planning and organizing.
Okay.
Okay. Really, those are the specifics that you're looking for. And a part of this executive function curriculum that isn't in planning or organizing is what I was talking about earlier, the determining saliency lesson in skills.
Yes.
Because that's just figuring out what's important. No matter if you're looking at it, if you're getting information because you're just looking at a scene, whether it's in a picture or just what's in front of you in your environment, or if you're reading texts or if you hear information, your teen has to figure out, what do I actually have to attend to in all this information? And that saliency piece comes with a lot of times rules. There's some simple rules that we have the kids discover. If you do that lesson, it teaches them how to figure out some of the rules. So it's like, and then there's simple rules where people are always more important than objects. So, if there's all these things happening with people and there's all these things, going on, there's certain emotions or relationships that you have that are more valuable than any of those broken toys or things that you're not getting to. If anybody's crying or sad, you always attend to those people first. So there's some rules that your kids have to learn about just daily life that are very general. Yeah. Then after that, you have to end up on the more specific end of the situation.
But it's hard figuring out how to approach some of this with our kids. If I sit and try to talk to Jem about this stuff, boy, he is so uninterested. But we discovered last year that there are riddles online that sometimes deal with this kind of stuff. There, especially, it was like right around Halloween last year where there was the riddle online that was a meme that everybody was doing, and you were supposed to ask all of your friends. So, you know, there's a railroad, and there are 3 guys that are working on a bridge in the railroad, and the train was supposed to be moved to another area of track, but it wasn't. You only have time to do one thing. Do you warn the 3 guys so that they live? It was this whole thing about, or do you let them go through, let the train go through, kill the 3 guys, but it saves 1,000 people on the other end. And they were telling me this quiz, and I was getting anxious thinking about it. But the truth of it was that it led to a conversation with my son that got to all of this stuff about, well, it was going to hit a building at some point, and we discussed the fact that people are more important than the building, that you would save the lives, not the building, and I learned through that because I couldn't get him to just talk about it. But if you did a riddle, for him, he wanted to do that. For other kids, you got to find another way.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they're teens,
Yeah.
and teens don't want to listen to their parents.
Yeah.
So my best thing is to get someone else to do it. Even for
Okay.
my own kids. Like I
Okay.
have one child that's she's typical, but extremely challenged on the executive function end. And, you know, talk about the eye rolling and, you know, all that stuff that teenagers do. But the thing is, it's better for me. And I just ask her, do you want me to do this now? Do you want your dad? Or do you want me to go tell a teacher at school?
Okay.
You know, or a counselor or somebody else.
Right.
And she chooses. She's just, you know, she makes the decisions because I said, somehow you're going to have to get this information. And so I actually, even with the kids that we work with here, I say, okay, I'm here. I bug you all the time. Like, I love the kids that are like at this end, and they're like, oh, mom's bugging me. I'm like, okay, obviously to preserve the parent relationship, it's better to have somebody else to do it.
Okay.
Because then you're not doing the teacher mother, like the dual role.
Yes.
And that really upsetting to a lot of the kids.
Yes.
And so we'll just tell the kid, who do you want to actually learn this stuff from?
I love that.
You know,
I need to write that on a Post-it and crochet it on a pillow.
no, but I'll go to a counselor at school or, you know, a resource teacher, and I'll say, like, here, this is upcoming activity at school.
Right.
We need to figure this out. I'll even, you know, if you have a treatment planner for ABA, I actually write out what they need to know.
Okay.
Like on the saliency end, try to figure out what the important things are. And with planning and organizing, especially events, it's very spot on.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Who's there? Is there a, you know, warning date? Do you have to reserve any RSVP?
Right.
You know, like how long will it take you to get there? You teach them how to use their maps, GPS, you know, like how
Yes.
long. Make sure somebody can take you if you can't get there on your own. Like there's really specific in the planning exercises about like what information you need, and the kids actually learn it really quickly. A lot of times I'll actually have like the worksheet and I'll give it to the teacher and I'll say, can you go over this? And basically this kid needs to do it for everything that happens at school.
And
for the
unfortunately, we're like so out of time. I lost all track of time because I was having so much fun. But then it also, we have to give them some sort of a reinforcer because to them being prepared is not the reinforcer.
Okay. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. If
Okay.
they really like the peers and want to go,
okay, then it might be.
It might be. But the other thing I forgot that's really important in this is so many of my kids prefer to do this on their phones now because
Okay.
they like the tech aspect of
Okay,
it.
yeah.
So if I tell them you can put all this information into their calendar and it
Yes.
gives them a reason.
Love
and
that.
and I have a lot of them text themselves.
Oh,
Because they like
nice.
texts.
Yes.
And they might not look at the calendar.
Uh-huh.
They text all the information because it gives them an opportunity to text at school, which maybe
Right.
their peers don't have the opportunity.
Right.
So they
Love
know
that.
I have to be at so-and-so by this time. It takes this long to get there. I need this. There's a permission slip. And they text it
Fabulous.
actually to their parents.
Ah.
And then it creates the parent not having to nag and ask.
Love it.
So the kid actually has a copy themselves and the parent has a copy so the parent doesn't have to ask.
Fantastic.
And the kids love that. So
Brilliant.
if you have a kid who's into technology, that's the way to do it.
Okay. Thank you so much. We didn't get to all of our questions, and I apologize to everybody, but this was so great. And we'll be asking you to come back in the future when Dr. Grandpuchet is busy or someplace where she can't get with us.